So, when I became 21, I followed in my father's footsteps and went up to northwestern North Dakota, right up on the Canadian border, and homesteaded near a little railroad town called Crosby. Just a day or two ago, I was rummaging around in some old papers of mine, and I came upon an old diary I didn't even know I had. It was written by a fellow I had known up there on the claim near Crosby, name of Ray Sorensen. Ray's father, Hendrick, had come up there in the 90s. So by now, Ray, together with his brother John and the old man, was working a decent-sized farm while I was still living in my old sod shack. So I figured I'm not necessarily getting any younger at 94 years of age, and here was an opportunity to put down a good yarn about those old times. Good times, too, almost forgotten by most folks. Times when we had the powers that be on the run. I had Ray's diary to tell most of the story for me. So I sat down at my typewriter and got started.
Hello, thank you for joining Theater and Stream here for a minisode. My name is Chuck. This minisode initially was intended to come out on election day, but due to circumstance and life and just the craziness of that particular event in our recent history, it has been gestating for a while instead. And the election results for congressional races are just now finally finishing counting, and everyone is still kind of reeling from the result. It kind of goes without saying. But the general feeling coming out of it, and especially when you look at the change in voting trends around the country, is a surprising shift towards the American political right. The purpose of this video isn't to get into the minutia behind that necessarily, as to me, it's just yet another cyclical pendulum swing that occurs in our binary political system. No matter which team you root for or which ideology you'd ascribe to, the lack of choice inevitably leads to sometimes dramatic upheavals in one direction or the other as voters grow dissatisfied with the outcomes delivered by the party in power, whichever it is. That said, in my day job at the Minot Daily News, I spent weeks before the election interviewing candidates and local leaders about the issues facing the state of North Dakota and its citizens, and ultimately, it just depressed me, mostly because of the lack of choices available to voters in North Dakota and around the nation. In many cases, the Republican supermajority in our legislature here in North Dakota is all but assured due to the GOP candidate running unopposed, manifestation of the mass polarization in our politics, demotivating many local Democrats from even considering seeking office. While the two-party binary has been essentially built in for most of our nation's history, there was a brief blip where North Dakota truly was a three-party state, which had lasting effects that linger on to this day. If you've never been forced to take a North Dakota history class, as most of the people who watch our videos probably haven't, I am referring, of course, to the period of time where the Nonpartisan League held significant sway in North Dakota politics. The NPL was a socialist uprising of discontented farmers and rural business owners, organized and recruited by a failed flax farmer from Beach, North Dakota, named Arthur C. Townley. Townley, an ardent socialist, took advantage of the rancor felt by those cohorts toward the Alexander Mackenzie political machine running North Dakota politics at the time, which was all but controlled by big banks, railroad companies, and granaries in Minnesota. A large swath of the electorate at the time felt unheard and dismissed by state legislators, which the capital set largely more concerned with maintaining the status quo. The divide, was exemplified by an apocryphal incident where a state representative named Treadwell Twitchell rebuffed a group of farmers airing out their complaints to go home and slop the hogs. This alleged statement lit the spark of the political prairie fire, which would redefine the state's political landscape. Townley traveled throughout North Dakota in a borrowed Ford Model T, recruiting and converting the largely Republican electorate toward the cause, which sought to wrest control away from power brokers in St. Paul and toward a more equitable situation that would end the economic exploitation inflicted upon them. The long and the short of it is that while the NPL would have enormous electoral success for around 30 to 40 years by converting a large contingent of Republican voters, its influence eventually diminished for a variety of reasons, despite it securing its initial wish list by creating a slate of unique state-owned institutions like the state mill, state elevator, and even a state bank, which is very unique in the United States and still exists today. By the 1950s, the League found itself instead being torn apart from within as two factions materialized. The insurgent sect sought to align with the Democratic Party, while the old guard preferred to support Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower in the presidential election. The end result was a majority of the League becoming Republicans overnight, while the insurgents remaindered the League that they controlled to being nothing more than a vestigial growth on the Democratic Party apparatus. Despite what you might hear online, the Democratic Party at large is still very much a neoliberal institution and only leans into progressive priorities so long as they are social wedge issues rather than class-based economic reforms. The late Lloyd Amdahl was not only the last Democratic NPL lieutenant governor in North Dakota, he also served a ceremonial role until he died recently as the secretary of the NPL organization, essentially just to prevent modern-day appropriation of the name by other political movements. For a time, rural disenfranchised North Dakota farmers proudly embraced the tenets of socialism in a rebuke to the power elite of their time, a notion utterly alien to their descendants going to the polls for the election recently. Now that the history lesson is out of the way, especially considering this is a state that most people probably can't find on a map, the Nonpartisan League and its legacy is very significant to me as a lifelong resident of North Dakota, and also serves as the subject for the only substantive film made in and about North Dakota, a film from 1978 called Northern Lights. Northern Lights was released in 1978 and dramatizes the founding and early victories of the Nonpartisan League. Mixing historical fact with fiction, Northern Lights cast a beacon on that great socialist experiment on the Northern Plains. In lieu of a bland historical retelling, one can easily find in Elwyn B. Robinson's History of North Dakota. I recommend you read that if you're at all interested in the subject. Northern Lights grounds itself by focusing less on the actual historical figures in favor of realizing the perspective and experiences of the average faceless North Dakota farmer Townley would go on to convert. The film begins in the then present, following a real-life North Dakotan named Henry Martinson. Martinson was a lifelong socialist from Crosby, North Dakota, and relates his discovery of fictional journals kept by a struggling farmer and League member named Ray Sorensen, setting the stage for the narrative of a time when we had the powers that be on the run. Set and filmed in and around Crosby during World War I, Northern Lights follows Sorensen, played by Robert Belling, who decides to join the League as a recruiter after seeing one too many family farms foreclosed due to railroads and banks undercutting his and his neighbors' way of life. Despite fear of retaliation by the powers that be and strife in his relationship with his fiancée Inga, played by Susan Lynch, Ray and his brother John, performed by the cast's only notable face in Joe Spano, contribute to the League's successes in the 1916 primary and general elections. Whatever euphoria they may have felt is dashed after receiving a foreclosure notice of their own for their family farm at the end of the film, offering a drop of poison within the hope the film closes with. The film was produced by Cinemanifest, a Marxist film collective founded by the former members of the San Francisco television station KQED's disbanded film department, which included co-directors and co-writers John Hanson and Rob Nielsen, as well as cinematographer Judy Irola.
I joined Cinemanifest. Rob and I were partners. I decided I want to make a movie in North Dakota. What do you make a movie about? Hey, the Nonpartisan League.
So, when I became 21, I followed in my father's footsteps and went up to northwestern North Dakota.
But Henry Martinson was the key. You talk about an extraordinary man. We couldn't have done the film without him. And of course, he's in the film. You know, he plays the storyteller at the beginning and the end. You know, we would write a script for him, and he'd say, well, what if we say it this way? You know, he was a great writer, poet, you know, union man.
What will you say?
Yes.
Made with a budget of little over $300,000 with some support by the North Dakota Humanities Council in the fall and winter of 1977, the filmmakers eschewed Hollywood production values, shooting instead in a grainy black and white 16mm. Irola's cinematography sparkles throughout the film, embracing the stark landscapes and craggy faces of its subjects. Filming pressed on even when temperatures and wind chill hit -40, requiring many outdoor scenes to be filmed in short bursts lest the equipment freeze. Apart from the leads, the rest of the cast was made up of non-professional locals, but the sparse dialogue and documentary approach lend a great deal of authenticity to the experience. A third of the dialogue is actually in Norwegian, as a great deal of North Dakotans at the time were first-generation immigrants.
Well, you know, we were lucky because we met people, the farmers and the small-town people, who were so themselves, and we wrote parts for them, you know, that fit them. And they were fearless, and they were terrific. You know, the mother and father, the Nesses from up by Crosby, up by Ambrose, they'd never acted before. So yes, it's a feature film, but it has the realism of a documentary. It has and that was purposeful. Some people use the word docudrama, but it was all scripted. All these people had to learn lines.
All right, let me ask you fellas a question then. If you buy a pound of coffee, who sets the price for that coffee?
God only knows, Ray.
And it's person to person. You know, it isn't just speeches. You come out to the farm, you talk to the people, his neighbor is sitting beside you. That's a way of organizing that the socialists actually came up with. You know, the League finally came to their rescue. And because they're genius at organizing, they were able to take over the state.
The film's score is a mixed bag, a combination of folksy strings and dodgy synths that are a product of their time, but unfortunately feel out of place. The real soundscape that carries the film is the howling and whispers of the wind over the plains, and the cracks of the farmsteads and barns the characters occupy. After the film completed, Cinemanifest held a premiere in Crosby in July 1978, and eventually booked screenings in larger markets around the Midwest. Northern Lights was later submitted to the Cannes Film Festival, where it went on to win the Camera d'Or, the award given to the best film by a first-time filmmaker.
Well, when we finished Northern Lights, there were no independent distributors. We had to distribute it ourselves. So we went around town to town. Who owns a movie theater? You know, hello, we got a movie that's going to come out, would you book it? And we started, of course, in Crosby. Dakota Theater in Crosby was the premiere in July of 1978. And then we went to all the little towns around there, and it spread across North Dakota. Well, of course, the premiere night at Crosby was unbelievable because all the people in the film were in the audience. And then word starts to spread, hey, what's this, you know? So we got a booking in Minneapolis. That was our first big city booking. And And then we applied to the Cannes Film Festival, just because, why not? You know, never expecting to get in, but got to do it. And got accepted, and went there. I mean, talk about rookies. Went there and ran around trying to get people to see the movie, and then we win a prize. And once we won the prize, that was what propelled it to be at bookings all over the country and back in the United States.
But then the late mail train came in. The rural vote had turned things around.
And so it touched a nerve. Just like the Nonpartisan League had touched a nerve back in the old days, Northern Lights in some way touched the same nerve with these small town people.
Unfortunately, being able to see this film for yourself is kind of hard. For a time, it was available on art house streaming site Mubi, but due to its independent origins, there aren't many hard copies of the DVD release lying around. Kino Lorber reportedly bought the rights to all of Hanson's filmography a few years ago and announced a remastered Blu-ray of the film was in the works, but as of this video, it hasn't been released. Low-quality rips of the New World VHS edition can be found on YouTube, so if you're curious, Northern Lights is definitely worth the watch. I was inspired to make this video after interviewing Dem NPL legislative candidate Mark Nelson from Rugby, North Dakota, who told me he felt more like a Leaguer than a Democrat. Nelson has a great deal of pride in representing the League on the party's ticket this year. He was unsuccessful, in his efforts to, win the favor of the voters, but he felt the League's priorities are just as, if not even more relevant today as they were back then. He told me the Nonpartisan League was right about everything. They were against big business and big money and big corporations. Now we have big oil that's actually running the state and big pharma running the state. If anything, things are worse now than when the League got its start. No matter who you voted for, on November 5th or 6th or whatever day it was, or if you didn't vote at all, I think we all should reflect a bit on what our local politics should prioritize. North Dakota politics especially has been swept up in the tides of the national culture war, and there's a very real schism developing between old guard Republicans and an insurgent rabble of Trump-aligned populists. The Dem NPL is largely a copy and paste of its national party's platform, which has little to offer voters who aren't already converted. We all could do with a bit more variety in our politics, and the Nonpartisan League and Northern Lights shows us what the kinds of lasting change can be achieved when we break away from ossified and corrupt political stagnation. We all deserve better, but it takes effort, will, and sacrifice to convince others to get their skin in the game as well. Thank you for watching.